Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Is the United States an exceptional country, the indispensable nation? Proponents of this idea claim the U.S. is a force for good in the world and has the right, even obligation, to act unilaterally when necessary. Critics charge American exceptionalism is dangerous to the U.S. and the world, as well as a cover for global domination and empire. To CrossTalk American Exceptionalism, I'm joined by Rodney Shakespeare in London. He is the co-founder of the Global Justice Movement. In Phoenix, we have David Merkel. He is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. And in Moscow, we cross to Mark Sleboda. He is a senior lecturer and researcher at Moscow State University. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I encourage it. Rodney, if I can go to you first in London, do you like the term American exceptionalism? And is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's an accurate term. The USA is egregiously exceptional. It spends 40% of the world arms budget, and with the undeclared spending, it's nearly 50%. If you take a year, say 1950, it's been involved in war for every single year. And in the undeclared wars, it does the assassinations and the torturing in favor of fascist regimes in South America. It's got a program of future wars against any independent Islamic state. It says all options are on the table, which means it will use atomic weapons against countries which have no atomic weapons. It supports the endless expansion of the Zionist entity into the lands of others. It spews poison like Israel spews phosphorus. The USA spews depleted uranium. It's the lull in the napalm and the Agent Orange. And it claims to support democracy, and yet all the time it supports the gas chokers, the throat slitters and the head choppers. For heaven's sake, it supports Saudi Arabia and the killer Khalifa in Bahrain.
Rodney, I think you made your point. You made your point very clearly, by the way. David Merkel in Phoenix, please respond. Do you like the term American exceptionalism, and isn't it something good or bad for the world?
Well, I think our panelist, Mr. Shakespeare, I don't know whether that was to be a comedy or a farce, but I don't think that characterizes the United States' role in the world. I do think the United States has been a force for good. I think that it has played a part in expanding freedom globally. That's not to say that the United States always gets its way. That's not to say that the United States should bully other countries. But when joined together with other nations to advance its principles, I think that the United States is an exceptional country, and I think that anybody would feel that their own country a sense of pride, and I certainly feel that. Now, recently, with the Obama administration, I think President Obama himself questions American exceptionalism, but he does not question Obama exceptionalism. So when he drew a red line in Syria, that was a different game, and I think that's how we got into the situation we're in today.
Okay, Mark, American exceptionalism, is it a good thing or a bad thing for the world? Because it certainly exists.
Well, it certainly exists, Peter. But I think one of the most interesting factors of the idea of American exceptionalism is how very unexceptional this ideology is. Every imperial power, every great power in the world has conceived of themselves and their use of power on the world stage in moralizing terms as exceptional. Yes. Whether we're talking about the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the French colonial empire, the Soviet Union, or the United States from the Cold War on to today. Every imperial power seeks to create a mythology of itself as a uniquely virtuous actor on the world stage. And we can see a bit of a disconnect between the way the rest of the world views this power, as characterized by our first guest in London, and the quite opposite view that many Americans have of their own country and its role in the world.
Okay, David, would you like to reply to that? Because a lot of people say that it is a cover, American exceptionalism is a cover for American dominion or imperialism, as some people would put it. I mean, there's something to that, is it, or not?
No, I think.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, look, I don't think you can see anything in U.S. foreign policy and suggest that it looks at all like Cecil Rhodes. I think that last week I was in New York at the UN General Assembly, and a lot of people talked about the Bush administration's overreach, but now they're talking about the underreach from the Obama administration. And friend or foe, they were looking for the United States to play a larger role. Why? Because minus the United States, there's less stability. Minus the United States, there's less international order. So the United States has a responsibility and has a role to play internationally.
Well, a lot of people would say, if I go to Rodney, is that the United States makes the world unstable in its unilateral actions around the world, just the opposite.
Well, we're only about 2 weeks ago from the American attempt to set off a Third World War. Fortunately, there was a bit of backbone coming from Russia. Could I go into the domestic situation in the USA?
Go ahead.
The true unemployment there is 23%. That's John Williams' shadow stats. And it's double that for young people. There's 50 million people on food stamps. The real incomes of the middle classes have gone backwards for 25 years. And we are told that America is the exemplar of the free market. It isn't. It's now it's a fascist society. The government has bought 2 billion dum-dum bullets, which are exploding bullets, to fire at its own people. And I'm being told by David that America is an exemplar to the world. It is now moving straight into fascism. It is spying on everybody else, spying on its own people. It's got 2,700 light tanks, all those dum-dum bullets, because its economy is collapsing, its political authority is collapsing, and as for its moral authority, it no longer has anything. Right the way throughout the world now, it is either laughed at or despised.
Mark, let's stay with the domestic issue here. It's because Congress wouldn't back Obama on Syria, and we saw the same thing happen in London with the House of Commons. Do you think that in the United States there's this feeling that American exceptionalism isn't good for America because they're not backing American foreign policy, specifically on Syria?
I think we see a distinct difference in the concept of American exceptionalism as is conceived by the general public, in which, like the early President Obama, completely different from the current President Obama, said that he believes America is an exceptional nation, much as the Brits regard Britain as exceptional and the Greeks regard Greek civilization as exceptional. But we've seen, particularly with Syria, although in prior conflicts as well, we've seen a disconnect with the way what you could call the foreign policy elite circles, the journalistic classes, the elite classes of the United States view the term American exceptionalism. And this is what Putin was addressing in his editorial for the New York Times. This is an idea of American exceptionalism where whatever domestic qualities the United States has, its particular political ideology creates this uniquely virtuous just cause to reorder the world along its own image, or at least within its own interests. This is extremely costly to the United States in terms of its economy. With the wars of the last decade have perhaps cost the United States more than $10 trillion. And when we speak of the United States, we're talking, of course, the United States taxpayers and the simply enormous national debt, state debt, city debt that the United States has built up in the process. Not to mention the cost in in lives, both of American lives, and as a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces myself, I can attest to the feelings of the rank and file among the military and that, but also in those injured and in the lives of those that this messianic idea inflicts on other countries.
David, Mark used the word virtuous. Does America have a virtuous foreign policy? Is that what makes it exceptional?
I think America pursues its interest and advances its principles. It doesn't try to make the world over in its image, but it does need to be true to principles that many believe are not American but are universal. I'd like to just go back to a couple points. One domestic, one international. The unemployment rate in the United States is about 7%. It's not 23%. It's still too high, and there's a lot of criticism on both sides of the aisle about.
David, that's nonsense.
Well, it's a fact. What's nonsense is you calling the United States of America a fascist. That's insulting. Internationally, I think that it is important for the United States to be stronger at home, to be more strong economically, and to set itself as a better example and lead by example and less preachy. But on Syria specifically, I think what we've had is a president of the United States that's been more reactive. Not being George Bush gets you a Nobel Peace Prize, but after that you have to come out with a strategic vision. None exists in this administration, and engagement in Syria at a much earlier point could have saved a lot of lives and prevented more radical elements from coming into Syria. And the president did say he was going to war, and then recognized that he would have less support domestically and internationally than George Bush did, and balked and went to Congress, and the Congress balked, and Putin gave him a lifeline, which he readily accepted.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on American exceptionalism. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing whether America is an exceptional country. Okay, I'd like to go back to you, Rodney, in London. A lot of critics of the United States around the world will say what makes America exceptional is that its ability to go to war unilaterally and suffer no consequences whatsoever. This is the kind of exceptionalism a lot of people don't like.
That is a very precise statement of the situation. In the case of Syria, it was the willingness of others to stand up. But America is essentially an arrogant, bullying power. It no longer has the political authority that David thinks it holds. It no longer has the moral authority, and economic power is shifting away from America to the West, and at some stage quite soon people will realize that they have been financing American militarism and that the dollar's going to crash. There's a great big pile-up coming for the USA, and it's primarily because it's a very, I'm not saying this of American people, but the elite and those who control the politics are beyond belief arrogant.
David, arrogance, I mean, that gets it to the point in a lot of ways. I mean, go back to Iraq. I mean, always going back to Iraq here, and this is what's really rattled the image of the United States for many, many people in the world. I mean, there are plenty of people in the world that have always hated America. I accept that, okay? But Iraq, people focus in on. Can the United States recover from that? Because it seems like there's no change of behavior until we got to Syria.
Sure, I think look, I think that looking at the Iraq War in hindsight, there's a lot to be said in a positive nature and a negative nature. But looking at the Middle East today, you can definitely say that the Middle East is far less stable. That the Arab Spring has turned into a Islamic winter, and there's a lot of issues there that affect a great number of people. I don't think that the United States, if we were sitting on the sideline, would be looked at by its critics any less arrogant, to use Mr. Shakespeare's word, than if we were fully engaged. My point is that the United States has a history of engaging, not mistake-free, but engaging in the world as a very positive force, expanding freedom and democracy, following brave people in the different countries.
Okay.
In Saudi Arabia, well, Saudi Arabia is a perfect example. Saudi Arabia is a perfect example. Any country advances their interests, that's fine. The United States advances its interests, has relations with Saudi Arabia, that's a problem. So your dichotomy is either they're an ideal country or we don't have relations with them. Well, that puts us very much out of the international community. That is a very negative aspect on stabilizing. And if you look at Saudi Arabia again, the United States has a very workable relationship with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia plays an important role in the global picture.
But to be fair here, no, gentlemen, let me stay with David here.
The need for greater freedom and democracy in Saudi Arabia.
Come on, but that's right. But David, if you're sending jihadists from Saudi Arabia into Syria, is that promoting democracy? America's ally? Come on.
No, and we're not. No, and we're not.
Okay, Mark. Go ahead.
Yes.
You want to jump in?
I think that the conception that David, with all due respect, has with the idea that the United States not only do they, which is certainly called into question with the results of the U.S.'s latest civilizing missions in Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, and so on, but also within this very concept that this unique vision of American democracy, which is certainly, in a country that believes that money is free speech, that corporations are people, has a rather unusual interpretation of democracy. But it believes that its vision, it has a responsibility to spread it around the world. This is kind of a teleological view of history, reminiscent actually of the Soviet Union and in its mission to communize the world. But what we see in the disconnect between what happened in what was called in the American media, the Western press, the Arab Spring, and the actual results is part of this, what I would characterize as an almost delusional reification of democracy, and the belief that by bringing this freedom and democracy specifically along American lines, regardless of the historical context, the ethnic divides, the religious tensions, that everything will be okay. And we've seen the results of this again and again.
You're absolutely right, Mark. If I can go to Rodney, I mean, democracy was in Egypt. Now it's run by a military dictatorship again.
Yes. And the USA has supported all the dictatorships from Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and the Persian Gulf states. I mean, I don't want to hear anything from David. The USA could simply turn those countries into democracies by pulling out its support for those narrow, corrupt, tyrannical autocracies. I mean, really, that is the issue. The USA could be trading with democracies right the way through the Persian Gulf. And all we get from David at best is the USA is following its interests. Those interests do not include democracy for people. And I don't want to hear him use the word democracy again.
No?
Thank you very much.
Okay, but we're going to give David a chance. We're going to give David a chance to reply now.
If I could talk for a second about democracy for Mr. Shakespeare. I think that a lot of the United States view the world as naive. Not as naive as what Mr. Shakespeare just mentioned, but back on Mark's point, I think that we can't force democracy. We can support greater freedom in civil society and a movement towards democracy. We can support it. We can't force it. But also, we need to be more wide open about the difference between movement towards democracy and what Mark described as sectarian violence, sectarian civil war, and not just because one guy has a black hat think that the opponent has a white hat. So the Middle East, as an example, is a very complex part of the world, as Mark described. But the United States' role in it needs to be more sophisticated, more able to identify that just because you're not supporting a leader that has been in power too long, that what's in opposition may not be any more democratic than the leadership itself. And as we saw in Iran in the 70s, as we see in Libya, and as we're painfully seeing in Syria, the sectarian violence, the leadership leaving is not necessarily the quickest road towards stability and democracy.
Mark, it seems to me that the U.S. still continues want to determine facts on the ground in the Middle East here. And after every single failure, there's no learning curve. They keep trying over and over again until they get it right. But it never, or almost never, works out as planned.
Yes, and I think you can see this. If it was simply a matter of the United States using its democracy, its supposed democracy and freedom, as a role model and acting simply as a best example that should be emulated to the world, I don't think anyone has a real problem with this. They may not choose to follow it, but no one has a problem with this. It is precisely the forcing that is the issue. And we always see that this forcing of democracy only and always comes in alignment with U.S. geopolitical interests. We see democracy, and it's almost a euphemism for our enemies, and money and weapons for our allies, be they the Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Qataris, various dictatorships in Egypt and elsewhere around the world. So we've got a stark choice between which hand U.S. foreign policy presents the principle to its enemies, but the gifts to its foes.
Okay. David, would you like to reply to that?
To its friends.
I just think, look, in the real world, the facts just simply don't support what Mark said or what Mr. Shakespeare has said. I think that if you're merging two different points, but if you looked at the international order, if you looked at the situation in the world, it is not stable. And this U.S. administration has been far too reactionary and far too focused on itself rather than trying to stem the tide of instability before
David, let me ask you a question. David, what would you like to see happen more proactive? I mean, most of the world, I would say, think that the United States is overreacting to everything around it. Maybe it should step back a little bit because, again, from the outside looking in, there's no difference between Bush and Obama.
Well, I think what I'd like to see is what Mark mentioned, which is the United States getting its economic and its domestic house in order to be a better example and to lend advice to the world so more countries could gain in prosperity. That's the thing that's nice about what Mr. Shakespeare said about economic movement around. It's not that the United States is necessarily coming down, but other countries are coming up. That's in our interest. That should be in everybody's interest. But I think what people were looking for in the Obama administration was a president that was more willing to develop international coalitions and to work proactively on international problems before they materialized into crisis that we see. That hasn't happened. That should have happened, and I think we're going to have a very long lame duck Obama administration, but it should happen hopefully in the next administration.
Okay, Rodney, I'm going to give you the last word. 20 seconds. Go ahead.
David mentioned Iran. The UK and the USA overthrew democracy in Iran in 1953, and over the years 1980 to 88, we gave the chemicals for Saddam Hussein to use poison gas on the Iranians. That is the sort of thing you get from American exceptionalism.
Okay, an exceptional conversation, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Many thanks to my guests today in London, Phoenix, and in Moscow. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, crosstalk rules.
It's will not
I love your voice.